Hey everyone, today we're going to be looking at my new update to my blob tracking module in TouchDesigner. This blob tracking module is a much easier to use blob tracker compared to the sort of way you would set it up in TouchDesigner, and it also works with the free and all the other paid models of TD. Today we're going to be going over the controls, so even if you have downloaded this module, you might want to watch that to understand what some of this all means and how to best use it. We'll be going over some briefly of some of the cool effects that you can create, which you might struggle to create with inside of TouchDesigner. And then I'll also briefly talk about some of the new internal components and how you can go beyond the controls just established here and add even more control and style to your blob tracking, and hopefully we'll have a really cool result in the end. So I just want to briefly talk about why we have this module and how you can make it for yourself completely for free. So essentially, this blob tracking isn't a TouchDesigner feature per se. It's something in the OpenCV library for Python, which has a bunch of computer image-based filters and controls. So basically what I have is a custom implementation of this, along with some other effects that I've manually coded in, all essentially inside of Python. And when you get this module, download this module, you'll have access to that entire script here. And you can take that into a text editor and edit it to your heart's joy. Now, since this is not a creative coding channel or a Python-based channel, I'm not going to be giving a tutorial myself on how to make that, but there are plenty of resources, of which I'll try to include links below on how to make that if you do have programming experience. And if people are genuinely interested in potentially some creative coding style, maybe visual effects, let me know. I would love to explore that maybe on a different channel or maybe even on this channel. I'm not entirely sure, but as for now we're sticking to TouchDesigner content, I'm going to talk through some of the new features. So essentially with this module, I want to create all of the more advanced sort of blob tracking features that people do in TouchDesigner, but I want them to be accessible with a simple plugin, tweak some controls, and plug out, and that's it. And essentially that's what we have going on today with all of these sort of cool effects created with just a few different overlays, which I will go into. But starting with the controls, so let's hide the backgrounds very quickly, like so. So when we click on the blob tracking, we can see that it takes an input, and I am just feeding in this video, which I've cropped. And then we have a bunch of controls. So this first control and the second control I'm going to skip over as one of the more complex ones to understand. But very briefly, going on to the next ones, we have max blobs. It does exactly what you would think it does, where we can define a set amount of max blobs. This will quickly begin to show one of the bigger limitations of this implementation, which is that I have a lot of the rendering and calculations being done on the CPU. We have an experimental GPU one that we're going to go to later and talk about, but as for now it's mostly be done on the CPU, which means you can see here with it running at a high resolution like it is, it struggles to run at real time. So the best way to use this tool is to, in my opinion, use it as non-real-time rendering, which means you would feed in a video, create an overlay like so, and then turn off the real-time flag and then render it out, and then it will render it at a smooth 30 or 60 FPS, whatever you define it to be, but it will like not calculate it in real time. That being said, if you do want to still use this as a real-time tracker, like maybe as an interactive setup, we have controls which we'll go to later, and some techniques we can do to optimize this a lot better to run at 30 or 60 FPS, depending on your computer hardware. Cool. So next, after max blobs, we have a draw trails feature. This is a greatly improved feature from the first version where we had a lot of different trails. This sort of works like similar to how we do in regular TouchDesigner when we add in trails, where it just draws a line in order between each component. We also have the line length. When we have a lot of blobs on screen, you might not want the average line overlaying too much, as it can get quite messy. So this one will just create a max line length, and you can see as we turn it down, it shortens it starting from the first initial point and building on top of that. And then we finally have a smooth trail option, which creates these really, really nice parametric curves. I had someone reach out to me on Instagram when I previewed this on how I implemented these with essentially math. And if you do want to look into that, you can actually go into the code here, and it will have all the different like smoothing calculations and basically how I created all these smooth lines inside of there. But math is the very simple answer. There was not a TD trick to it. Pressing forward, let's turn those off for visibility. We have show IDs, very simple. Maybe you want some IDs on, maybe you don't. Later iterations, I think I will add like customizable text here, but for now it just does ID and then the blob ID number, and same, it only positions in the top left. But alternatively, you can turn the IDs into coordinates. If you prefer more of a like text style look, this will give you the exact pixel coordinates of where each blob is. And yeah, it updates in real time, as you can see. Next, let's turn those off for visibility. We have blob thickness. There's a limitation here with the implementation I have, which, oh, excuse me, only allows this blob thickness to be a integer value, which means the scaling between each thickness isn't as smooth as I would want, but I'm going to continue to work on that for later versions. But yeah, if you want a bit more of a thick border, there you go. Min size and max size. Now, this is calculated on a pixel basis, so that means the amount of pixels that go into that are in your video that you're feeding in will result on different sized blobs like here. You can see if I make the minimum size a lot smaller, it doesn't get too small because we have a 1080p video going in. The max size also caps out at 5,000 here, and the min size goes up to 200. But these values are just like recommended values, and if they're not going to, like, if they're still too small, then I highly recommend actually manually changing these values yourself and entering in custom values. And then sometimes you might want to even go extremely beyond the max size limitation if you have like a high pixel count video going in. So yeah, just play around with these sliders to your heart's desire, but then also don't be afraid to enter custom values and try that out. And it will also be affected by this top one as well, but we will touch on that soon. Next, another highly requested feature is outline color. Works exactly how you would expect. You can just change the outline color using the RGB values like so. It has pretty good precision, and the transparency layer does not work. I added in transparency for the blobs, but with the way it's been calculated on the CPU, it's a really, really tenuous, like, it creates a big strain on the CPU, and instead creating a like level top and then using an opacity slider, sorry if I turned that one on, it gives you a much faster calculation of opacity. So if you do want to do opacity, that would be my recommendation. And then finally, threshold. This is a really, really simplified slider, so I don't want to overcomplicate the controls for people that didn't really know how blob tracking works per se. So this threshold slider, if I just bring the original image back in, like so, you can see here when we change the threshold, you can sort of see how it works as we bring it down. Again, I will explain the more technical side of what is happening here soon, but just for the more beginner focused people, you can sort of see how this threshold works. and play with it to your heart's content. But yeah, that's essentially the main new core features, aside from these top two. So these top two features are primarily based at refinement of the blobs as well as optimization. So the first one is pre-blob resolution scale, and I've sort of highlighted it here, accuracy versus frames per second. Essentially, if we have this set to 1, there will be no downscaling of the image we pass in before the blob tracking is calculated. So in that case, this 144 by 1080 video that we're passing in will be rendered and calculated at that exact resolution, which will be very, very, very slow on the computer, as you can see, like so. But what it does allow us to do is get really, really small, and if I just maybe change, you can see some of the blobs here, like we can get really, really insane precision with the blobs when we have this high resolution one. And if you render this at non-real time, it will render out to a smooth 30 or 60 FPS. So if that's something, if you're interested in non-real time content, this tool will be hopefully really useful to you. But when we bring this down, you can see those smaller blobs won't be as small as the image is blurred a little bit, and now it's running at like 80% of that original resolution. And in fact, I highly recommend, if you want to go for something real time, bringing this resolution down quite a bit. And let's make this max size a bit bigger, and then change the threshold. So you can see the small blobs that we get are nowhere near as small, but we're running at smooth 20 FPS at the moment. That's still a bit too slow, but we'll get into more optimization tricks soon. And again, this is CPU based, and to be honest, I don't have a great CPU on this computer, so it's a little bit hard for me to show off, but I do have a good GPU, so hopefully that will be relevant soon. So yeah, that's essentially what this first slider does here. But this tool, I think, is really, really great for non-real-time blob tracking, but still can be optimized for real-time. This next one is a pre-blur amount. So before we pass the video into the BlobTracker, we blur it a certain amount. And as it says here, it's sort of like stability versus detail. So when we blur the image, the blobs that are highlighted are gonna go across more frames, and that means the blobs aren't gonna jitter around trying to hold on to that single point. Like if we have this rectangle here, if this is a lot smaller and it's a moving image, the blob's gonna jitter along as it updates. But if we blur it, then across multiple frames, it's not gonna move as much, which means the blob will be a little bit more stable. So it's sort of like it depends on what kind of look you want. So if we want the blobs to have extreme detail, you can see here we can make them tiny, like really tiny, like this. And again, this will be another FPS thing though, as it has to calculate even more and more blobs. I'm just waiting for a scene that makes a little bit more sense. We have like a really blurry scene going in the background right now. Yeah, so something like this, where we have, let's turn off this blur, a city like that. And if I bring this resolution scale up as well, and then maybe bring the max blob size down, and then, for example, we start playing with the threshold, you can really start to get some crazy looking visuals just by playing with the different controls here. And you can sort of get this really fine, refined look without that you can't really get in TouchDesigner with these really, really small pixels. I'm not even sure if these small blobs are like showing up in the video, but hopefully they do. But yeah, so essentially combining those two controls, and you see here when we blur it, a lot of those smaller points are lost, and will turn into bigger points. You can see here, for example, this little bit of light has been blurred out to this point, which means the blob will sit there. You can see this one wasn't like, it just sits there across frames, whereas when we have it a lot smaller, it may be very jittery and there's quite a lot of ones moving around. So yeah, it's just more stylizing techniques. So I'm going to talk about the actually, before I talk about the last button here and also the internal components, I'm going to talk about the outputs and how you can stylize it sort of in a way that I have here. So let's hide the backgrounds and look at output 1, which is our main out, which gives us all of the blobs as we requested as a transparent overlay. Like so. You can see we turn on all the IDs and all this sort of stuff. Just going to turn this back to white so it looks a little bit nicer. Now the reason I've done it this way is essentially because it allows us to apply post-processing to our image and our blob layer without having the two stitched together. And it's really easy to combine these two back in. And we can see when we go to our second to last output, it's just our input file, regular ones. So we have these two ones here. And if I just get like an over or even a composite, because a composite has the over operation in it. And if I put the blobs over the image, you can see, boom, you're done. And that's it. If that's all you want to do with this video, with this module, then it's that simple to combine those effects in. As for any of the more complicated visual effects that you might want to perform, that's essentially why I've laid it out like this. So looking at our second output, we have just the blobs. This is a outline of just the blobs. It won't be any of the like trail features or anything like that, or IDs. It is just a square outline of the blobs. Now, the reason why you might want to do this is because if you want to change any of the effects inside or outside of the blobs, for example, what I've done here is I have blurred the background. I hope that's obvious. Blurred the background, but kept everything inside the blob, the original style. That's exactly why I've done this layer. And to quickly show how I've done that technique, I've combined this layer with the blobs with the original image, and we have that. Then I've simply overlaid the blobs like so, simple over, and now you can see if we bring in like our trails, it'll be drawn over. And then once again, I've put that over the original image, which has been blurred, and it's really, really simple. And I hope from there you can sort of see how I might create something like this, or like this. There's some videos I posted on Instagram. It should be relatively simple to like take these combined layers and then create really cool visual effects. Another thing you might want to do is that people like inverting the colors, like the inside of the blobs will be inverted. And that's really, really easy to do as well. Like if we get this layer that we have selected and bring in the original image and bring in the blobs, and now we can play around with like all these different effects. If you just scroll through all of these, you're gonna find some that you really like. You can even like adjust the hues. So like if we pick something like that, or if we just go to here and add in a level like so, you can invert the colors. You can play around with the black level and do all these sort of things and style these looks to precisely what you want. You have the ability to change each individual layer to look precisely how you want it to look without having to, in TouchDesigner, create all the different instanced and rendering components and layer that all together. Essentially, this module should give you the power to do all the blob tracking in TD with a lot more precision and like all the more advanced visual effects without needing like one of those 1-hour tutorials that I've done in the past. Very quickly, just going on to the next layer, this is a really, really simple effect. It's that displaced one where it takes a different part of the image and puts it inside. This was one of the more like complicated visual effects, I think, for beginners to put together, so I just offered it as an output, a simple output, but that's essentially all this one is the displaced effect. And when we go into the module soon, you'll see some ability to customize it. That we then have, as mentioned, is just the raw image. And then finally, we have the experimental fast blob tracking output. And you can see when we toggle it on, everything else gets toggled to off, and this one gets toggled on, and we already have some blobs appearing. And you'll see it runs, well, once we disable everything, it'll run at a lot higher FPS. So let's talk about this fast blob tracking. Essentially, this is a feature that I didn't prepare in time for the release of this module. But I thought, you know what, since I'm working on it and planning to develop it for next stages, let me include the bones of it here. So anyone who does have more advanced TD knowledge can actually just like go in and start to play around and combine it with the features of this module to create something of their own desired look. So to really sort of actually use this last output here, we need to go inside the BlobTracker. And when we come inside here, you'll see a few different things highlighted. So this experimental rendering here, sorry, I need to go turn it on, like so, just does a more traditional style rendering inside of TouchDesigner. But what it does instead is does all the calculation of OpenCV with this script here, and then provides instancing data, which then you do your traditional instancing in TouchDesigner. So if you have experience with creating blob tracking before, using all this instancing like rectangles and all that stuff, then this should be pretty approachable, I hope, for you. It does a simple little wee fit to match the input resolution. You have blur and threshold controls like so, like here, which are not tied to the like the parent component, but are like manual controls. You then have the script which does all the blob tracking, which if you know Python, you're welcome to change. Instancing combines it, does the edge, combines it back in, outputs it. If you know how this all works, here is the code to start playing around and creating something with it. If you do not, don't worry. Hopefully this will be something I work on in future. The main purpose is to bring GPU rendering to this Python script, but still utilizing all the Python script. And again, this experimental rendering will work with the free version of TouchDesigner. So again, that is sort of the whole reason why I'm bringing this feature. So the last two things I want to talk about is when we go to the top of the file here, we see threshold and blur. And you can see that these are being controlled by the parent components. So starting with the blur, this might be something that you obviously might want to just skip or change the pre-shrink amount to be like 0 if you want it to be really, really accurate. You can also then change the different types of blurs. Now, this is not something I think beginner users need, but I think more advanced users can definitely take a hold of, depending on the types of blurs that they want to play with. Let me turn that back on so we can sort of see the video coming in. So if we turn the pre-shrink down, you can see even with a slight blur applied, the accuracy is much higher. And then you can see we have all these different types of blurs that will change the way the image highlights, and then also the way that the blob tracking is applied. So again, hopefully a more advanced users can really take hold of that and get some really, really good precision of the blob tracking. And then next, we have the threshold layer, and you can sort of see with how this image is laid out, you can sort of see it's like creating this arc shape and how it fits this image here. This threshold is what determines where the blobs are drawn. And depending on the video you feed in, it's going to be really different. The threshold is going to be really, really different. Like maybe you want it to be like the bright parts of the image. Maybe you want it to be the person's face or the lighting or the background or whatever. So that's why you might want to come into here and start playing around with the comparators. So you can change it to less and greater, and get different sort of effects. You can see now it's highlighting onto these bright parts of the image. And then you might want to also change it from green, which I found like is a nice balance that works the best across all the trial images I was doing. From green to RGB average, even the alpha level if you have some transparent image. I don't in this case. Luminance, and so on. And then it gets fed into the script, processed and passed out. And you also see here we have the displaced effects as well if you want to customize that to your heart's desire. But essentially that is it for today's video. Now I would love to really see people, if you use this tool at all, please tag me and everything. I really want to see people using this. If people really like this and take hold of it, then I'll do more tutorials unlocking some more advanced visual effects using this. Again, not necessarily anything you can't do in TD itself, because TD is, a programming language, and essentially it's boundless, limitless with what it can do. But hopefully this just makes it a little bit easier for people and inspires some cool creativity. And I'm excited to see what everyone comes up with. But that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you guys next time. Peace.